She was worth $420 million and couldn't pay for a $5 coffee. Michael Rivers stood three people back in the Monday morning line at the Starbucks on 42nd Street, watching the most powerful woman in Manhattan's tech sector turn crimson as her American Express Centurion, the black card that supposedly had no limit, got declined for the third time. The barista, a kid barely out of college with tired eyes and a name tag reading, "Marcus ran the card again," with the mechanical patience of someone who'd seen every variation of human embarrassment this city could produce. The machine beeped its rejection. 12 people behind Victoria Sterling shifted weight from foot to foot, checking phones, sighing audibly. One man muttered something about people holding up the line. Michael watched Victoria's spine stiffen, watched her reach into a wallet that probably cost more than his monthly rent, searching for another card with fingers that trembled just enough to betray the crack in her armor. Her Armani suit was immaculate, her hair pulled back in a style that said she'd spent money to look like she hadn't tried, and everything about her screamed control except for those hands. Michael looked down at his own wallet, a single $10 bill crumpled and soft from being folded too many times. He'd pulled it from Lucas's piggy bank that morning, leaving an IOU note his 9-year-old son probably wouldn't understand. The money was supposed to buy Lucas hot lunch at school instead of the peanut butter sandwich Michael had packed. But something in Victoria Sterling's face, not the embarrassment, but the shock beneath it, the genuine confusion of someone whose world had just tilted sideways, made Michael's hand move before his brain could calculate the cost. He stepped forward, reaching past her shoulder, and placed the 10 on the counter. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended, rough from the night shift he'd just finished. "I've got it." Victoria turned. Their eyes met. Hers were the pale blue of winter sky, and for just a moment Michael saw something in them he recognized from his own mirror, the particular loneliness of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to need help. Then her expression shuddered, professional courtesy sliding into place like a mask. "That's not necessary. It's just coffee." The words hung between them. Marcus had already taken the 10, was making change, and Victoria stood frozen in that awful space between pride and practicality. Michael could see her doing the math, weighing whether accepting charity from a stranger was worse than continuing to hold up the line. He knew that calculation. He'd made it himself in a hospital waiting room 3 years ago when a nurse had pressed a 20 into his palm and told him to get something to eat. "Thank you." The words came out stiff, formal. "I'll pay you back." "Don't worry about it." Michael gestured toward the pickup counter. "These things happen." "Not to me." She said it without arrogance, just stating fact, and Michael believed her. Everything about Victoria Sterling suggested a life of perfect control, from the sharp angles of her blazer to the geometric precision of her nails. The declined card was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of her carefully constructed existence. Michael ordered his own coffee, black regular, size the cheapest thing on the menu, and stood beside her at the pickup counter, both of them trapped in the social obligation of proximity. "Grande oat milk latte extra shot," Marcus called. "Regular black coffee." They reached for their cups simultaneously. Victoria's fingers brushed his, and Michael felt her flinch at the contact. It wasn't disgust, he'd felt that often enough to know the difference. This was surprise, the reaction of someone unaccustomed to casual touch. She pulled back, holding her cup like a shield. "You work at West Tower?" She was reading his name tag. "Night security." "Yes, ma'am. 8 months now." Her face did something complicated. Michael couldn't read all of it, but part was recognition, not of him, but of her own failure to see him. He'd stood at that security desk every night for 8 months, watching her stride past at odd hours, always alone and always moving with the purposeful speed of someone running from stillness. She'd never once looked at him. Why would she? He was part of the furniture, invisible as the marble floors she crossed. "I'm Victoria Sterling." She extended her hand like she was sealing a business deal. Michael shook it. Her grip was firm, businesslike, the handshake of someone who'd learned early that weakness was liability. His own palm was rough from the calluses that hadn't faded despite 3 years away from real work. He saw her notice them, saw the micro-calculation behind her eyes, trying to square the calloused hands with the security guard uniform. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Sterling." He used the formal address, deliberately maintaining the distance between their worlds. "Have a good day." Michael walked out into the Manhattan morning, leaving her standing there with her coffee and her confusion. Behind him, he heard her phone ring, heard her answer with the crisp authority of someone back in control. The moment was over. He'd paid for a stranger's coffee with money he couldn't afford to spend, and that was that. Except it wasn't. Victoria's phone was already pressed to her ear as she pushed through the Starbucks door, her assistant Karen's voice sharp with urgency. Ms. Sterling board meeting in 15 minutes. Mr. Harrington arrived early. He's asking to see the quarterly staffing reports. Tell him I'll be there in 10. Victoria ended the call and tried to push the coffee incident from her mind, tried to rebuild the armor that had cracked. But as she walked the 3 blocks to Tech Vision Tower, something nagged at her. She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, and tried to log in. Password incorrect. She tried again. Account locked, too many failed login attempts. Victoria stopped walking, causing a tourist to crash into her from behind. She ignored his complaint, staring at her phone screen. IT, this is Sterling. My banking app is locked. What happened? The technician's voice was professionally apologetic. Ms. Sterling, we detected 3 failed login attempts from an IP address in the Cayman Islands at 3:47 this morning. Our security protocol automatically locked the account to prevent unauthorized access. Victoria's throat went dry. Someone tried to hack my personal account? It appears that way. We've flagged it and fix it now and send me the full security log. She hung up, fingers tight around her phone. The declined card hadn't been random. Someone had deliberately locked her out of her own accounts, timed perfectly to humiliate her during the morning board meeting. But who would know her Monday Starbucks routine? Who would benefit from such a petty power play? The boardroom on the 47th floor of Tech Vision Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into a toy box of ambition far below. Victoria entered to find all 12 board members already seated, coffee steaming in front of them, folders open. And at the head of the table in her chair sat Richard Harrington. He was 58, with the kind of silver hair that looked dignified in photographs, and the smile of a man who enjoyed watching things break. His suit probably cost more than Michael Rivers made in 6 months. His Patek Philippe watch definitely did. He looked up as Victoria entered, his expression one of mock surprise. Victoria, so glad you could join us. He didn't move from her seat. Please sit wherever you're comfortable. Every eye in the room watched Victoria calculate. She could demand her seat back, make it a power struggle, turn the meeting into theater. Or she could take it in stride, demonstrate that chairs didn't matter when you owned the company. She sat 3 seats down directly across from Richard and smiled with all her teeth showing. Let's begin. Richard leaned back in her chair, completely at ease. I've been reviewing your Q3 numbers. Strong revenue growth, impressive client acquisition. But I have concerns about your staffing costs. He slid a folder across the table. Specifically, your hiring practices. Victoria didn't open the folder. Our hiring practices are designed to attract top talent. Are they, Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Let me give you some examples. Sarah Chen, 52, former CMO at a competitor. You hired her as a senior advisor at $180,000 annually, despite the fact that she'd been out of work for 18 months after being let go. Sarah has 30 years of marketing experience and relationships throughout the industry. Sarah was fired for performance issues and is 4 years from retirement age. You're paying premium wages for damaged goods. Richard smiled. Or perhaps charity. The word landed like he'd intended it to. 2 board members shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Chen, no relation to Sarah, cleared his throat. Richard, that's a bit. Let me continue. Richard cut him off smoothly. Maria Rodriguez, single mother of 2, hired as a data analyst with explicit approval for flexible hours. Her productivity metrics are 15% below team average. Victoria's jaw tightened. Maria requested flexible hours to accommodate childcare. We granted them because her skill set is valuable and our culture supports work-life balance. Your culture supports inefficiency. Richard turned to Paige. Tom Bradley, cancer survivor with an 18-month gap in employment. You hired him despite the obvious health risks and insurance costs. Tom is in full remission and is one of our best engineers. Tom is a liability waiting to happen. Richard set down his papers and looked directly at Victoria. I could go on, But the pattern is clear. You're running this company like a charity instead of a business. Your father would never have. My father is dead. Victoria's voice could have cut glass. And this is my company, which I have an 8% stake in. Richard's smile widened. Forgive me. I'm merely concerned about shareholder value. You understand. Thomas Chen spoke up, his voice careful. Richard, while I appreciate your diligence, Victoria's hiring decisions have resulted in one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. Happy employees are productive employees. Happy employees who underperform are expensive employees. Richard closed his folder. But there's one case that particularly concerns me. A rejected application from 8 months ago. MIT engineer, dual degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, 4 patents to his name, still being used by the Department of Defense, I might add, and 15 years of experience at Northrop Grumman. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Your HR department rejected him without an interview. The reason cited was a 3-year employment gap with no explanation provided. Richard leaned forward. This candidate applied for a senior security analyst position with a requested salary of $140,000. Do you know what he's doing now? Victoria didn't answer. She knew what was coming. He's working as a night security guard in this building. $36,000 a year. His name is Michael Rivers. Richard let that hang in the air. You rejected a certified genius because of bureaucratic nonsense, and now he's checking doors for minimum wage. That, Victoria, is the cost of your charity-first approach. You throw money at mediocrity while letting brilliance slip through your fingers. The room went silent. Victoria could feel every board member's eyes on her, could feel their calculations shifting. Richard had just painted her as both wastefully generous and negligently blind. It was a masterful trap. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Victoria's voice stayed level. I'll review our HR screening protocols. Will you? Richard stood gathering his papers. Or will you continue prioritizing sentiment over sense? Because if it's the latter, this board may need to reconsider whether you're the right person to lead this company forward. He paused at the door. By the way, did you have any trouble with your cards this morning? I heard there was some sort of banking glitch. Technology can be so unreliable. He left. The door clicked shut behind him with the finality of a threat delivered. Victoria sat through the rest of the meeting on autopilot, nodding at appropriate moments, signing off on budgets she'd approved weeks ago. But her mind was racing. Richard had mentioned her declined card. He'd known about it within hours of it happening, and his comment about technology being unreliable had carried the weight of confession wrapped in plausible deniability. The Cayman Islands IP address. The perfectly timed hack. Richard's convenient arrival early to the meeting, ready with ammunition about her hiring failures. This wasn't coincidence. This was warfare, and somehow, inexplicably, Michael Rivers had become a piece on Richard's chessboard. The moment the meeting ended, Victoria returned to her office and locked the door. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage, as she called her assistant. Karen, I need the HR file for Michael Rivers. Every piece of paper, and I need it now. Yes, Ms. Sterling, and you have a call holding from Take Messages, no interruptions. Victoria hung up and pulled up her computer, opening a private browser. She typed Michael Rivers, Northrop Grumman into Google and waited. The search results loaded. The first hit was a LinkedIn profile last updated in June 2021. The second was a news article. Victoria clicked it. The headline made her stomach turn. Drunk driver kills mother and daughter in I-87 crash. The article was from the Albany Times-Union, dated June 16, 3 years ago. Victoria read it twice, then a third time, trying to absorb the clinical language of tragedy. Jennifer Rivers, 34, elementary school teacher. Sophie Rivers, 6 years old, first grade. Both killed instantly when Roger Patterson, 52, drove his pickup truck across the median into oncoming traffic. Blood alcohol content 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. Patterson arrested at the scene. Michael Rivers, 34, husband and father, minor injuries. Lucas Rivers, 5, survived with a broken arm. Victoria's office suddenly felt too small, too bright. She stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, staring down at the city that kept moving, regardless of who was broken inside it. Michael Rivers had lost his wife and daughter to a drunk driver. He'd walked away with minor injuries while they died. And then he'd quit his job at Northrop Grumman. The article didn't say that, but Victoria could fill in the blanks and disappeared from the professional world for 3 years. Karen knocked and entered without waiting for permission, dropping a manila folder on Victoria's desk. The Rivers file. Is there anything else? Get me a private investigator. The best one. Money is no object. What are they investigating? Everything. Michael Rivers, Richard Harrington, and the connection between them. I want to know what happened in the last 3 years. I want to know where every dollar went. And I want to know if Richard has any business interests in the Cayman Islands. Karen's eyes widened slightly, but she just nodded. I'll make the calls. Alone again, Victoria opened the HR file. The application was dated October 15th, 8 months ago. Michael's resume was impressive, even at a glance, MIT degrees, patents that would make any security firm salivate, experience at one of the most secretive defense contractors in the country. His requested salary of $140,000 was actually below market rate for someone with his credentials. He should have been asking for $200,000 minimum. The employment history section told the story Richard had already outlined. Steady progression from entry-level engineer to senior architect, then nothing. June 2021 to October 2024. 3 years and 4 months of blank space. Under reason for gap, Michael had written simply, personal family matters. The HR notes were clinical and damning. Candidate refused to elaborate on employment gap despite repeated requests. Uncooperative attitude raises concerns about transparency. Additionally, candidate specified unusual work schedule requirements, nights only, or flexible daytime hours, suggesting potential reliability issues. Recommend rejection. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. Michael hadn't been uncooperative. He'd been protecting his privacy. He hadn't wanted to stand in some HR office and explain that his wife and daughter were dead, that his 5-year-old son was traumatized, that nights were the only time he could work because days belonged to therapy appointments and school pickups and holding together the shattered pieces of what was left of his family. And her company had rejected him for it, had judged his grief as a character flaw. Victoria reached for her phone, hesitated, then dialed the private investigator's number that Karen had just texted her. A woman answered on the second ring, voice professional and neutral. This is Sarah Woods. You're calling about an investigation. Michael Rivers, I need everything. Financial records, medical histories, if you can get them, legally, employment history, current living situation. I need to know what happened in the last 3 years. If that's going to require some creative sourcing, medical records especially. I don't care about creative. I care about answers. How much? 10,000 retainer. Reports as I find them. Could take a few days. You have until tomorrow night. Victoria hung up before the investigator could argue about timelines. She spent the next 2 hours trying to work, trying to focus on the budget projections and vendor contracts that actually mattered to running a $400 million company. But her eyes kept drifting back to Michael's application, to the 3-year gap that told a story her HR department had been too bureaucratic to read. At 7 in the evening, her private email pinged. Sarah Woods worked fast. Victoria opened the encrypted attachment, downloaded it to a secure folder, and started reading. The financial records came first. Patent sales in the summer of 2021, 2 of Michael's 4 patents sold for a combined $180,000. The investigator had included market comparisons. Similar patents had sold for $400,000 or more. Michael had taken whatever money he could get, quickly suggesting desperation rather than strategy. His savings account showed the influx, then a steady drain. Rent, groceries, medical co-pays for Lucas's therapy sessions. By September 2024, the account was down to $8,000. His credit cards, which had been at zero, had climbed to maxed out status by the same month. The job application history made Victoria's chest ache. 47 applications in 6 weeks, sent to everything from defense contractors to tech startups to retail security firms. Every single one specified night shifts or flexible daytime hours. Every single one was rejected. The reasons varied: overqualified, employment gap, poor fit, but the result was always the same. The medical records were sparse. Lucas Rivers had 18 months of intensive therapy with Dr. Patricia Kim, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. The notes were redacted for privacy, but the diagnoses were visible: PTSD, selective mutism separation, anxiety disorder. There were no corresponding records for Michael. He declined all therapy for himself. The school records for Lucas showed 98% attendance at PS 321 in Brooklyn. The counselor's notes praised Michael's involvement, never missed a pickup, attended every conference, responded to all emails within hours. One note stood out: this level of parental dedication is rare and commendable. Lucas is fortunate to have such a committed father. Victoria finished reading as the sun set over Manhattan, painting her office in shades of gold and shadow. She sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights, thinking about a man who'd sacrificed everything to save his son. A man who'd sold his life's work for a fraction of its value to pay for therapy. A man who'd applied for jobs he was wildly overqualified for, because those were the only jobs that would let him be present for Lucas. And her company had rejected him because he wouldn't perform his grief for a stranger's convenience. Victoria picked up her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad, then she texted Karen, "Schedule Michael Rivers for my office. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Tell him it's a security briefing. Don't mention me." She set the phone down and walked to the window again, watching the lights flicker to life below. Somewhere out there in a small apartment in Brooklyn, Michael Rivers was probably making dinner for his son, helping with homework, doing the invisible work of keeping a traumatized child together. He had no idea that tomorrow his life was about to change. Victoria hoped she wasn't about to make things worse. Michael got the message at 11 p.m. halfway through his shift. He'd been doing rounds on the 32nd floor when his phone buzzed with a text from TechVision's automated scheduling system. "Mandatory security briefing tomorrow 9 a.m. Executive Suite. Attendance required." His first thought was that he'd done something wrong. His second was that he'd been recognized from the Starbucks incident and Victoria Sterling was going to fire him for overstepping boundaries. His third thought was purely practical. He'd have to find someone to cover the end of his shift and hope Lucas didn't wake up before Michael got home to see him off to school. He texted back his confirmation and spent the rest of his shift distracted checking doors without really seeing them, nodding at late-night workers without registering their faces. At 6 a.m., he clocked out and took the subway back to Brooklyn, arriving at his apartment just as Lucas's alarm started beeping. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, old fixtures, walls that needed paint. Michael couldn't afford, but it was clean and safe and in a good school district, and that was what mattered. Michael pushed open Lucas's door and found his son already awake, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling with Charlie the dragon clutched against his chest. "Morning, buddy. How'd you sleep?" Lucas shrugged, 9 years old and already fluent in the language of non-committal responses. Michael sat on the edge of the bed. "Dreams?" Another shrug. But Lucas's fingers were tight around Charlie's threadbare fabric, and his eyes had that distant look that meant he'd been somewhere Michael couldn't follow. "Mom and Sophie," Michael kept his voice gentle. A small nod. "Good dreams or sad dreams?" "Both." Lucas's voice was quiet. "We were at the beach, the one with the lighthouse. But then Mom said they had to go and I couldn't come with them." Michael's throat closed. He pulled Lucas into a hug, feeling the small body tremble. "They loved you so much, Luke. You know that, right?" "I know." Lucas pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand in that particular gesture of boys who'd been taught that crying was private. "Are you working tonight?" "Yeah, but listen, Dad has to go into work early this morning for a meeting. Just for a couple hours. Can you get yourself ready for school? Mrs. Chen will walk you to the bus." Lucas's face went carefully blank, the mask he wore when anxiety was rising. "What kind of meeting?" "Just security stuff. Nothing to worry about." "Are you in trouble?" "No, buddy, I promise." But Lucas didn't look convinced, and Michael felt the familiar stab of guilt that came with every disruption to their carefully maintained routine. Stability was everything for Lucas. Changes were threats. Even a morning meeting at Dad's job could trigger anxiety that would echo for days. Michael made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, one of the 5 meals Lucas would eat without complaint, and watched his son push food around his plate without eating much. By 8:15, Mrs. Chen from downstairs had collected Lucas for the walk to the bus stop, and Michael was alone with the apartment's silence. He showered and changed into clean slacks and a button-down shirt he'd bought at Target 3 years ago, back when he'd still been interviewing for real jobs. The fabric was thin at the elbows, and the collar was starting to fray, but it was the best he had. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger, A man playing dress-up in the costume of someone who mattered, someone who belonged in executive suites. The subway ride back into Manhattan felt surreal. All those morning commuters with their coffee and their purpose, and here was Michael, 48 hours removed from working the night security desk, about to meet with God knew who, about God knew what. He arrived at Tech Vision Tower at 8:50 and took the elevator to the 47th floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. Karen, Victoria's assistant, greeted him with professional warmth. Mr. Rivers, Ms. Sterling is expecting you. Go right in." Michael's stomach dropped. Ms. Sterling, not a security briefing. Victoria Sterling herself. He pushed open the office door and stepped into a space that made his apartment look like a closet. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting. Furniture that belonged in magazines. And behind an enormous desk, Victoria Sterling stood with her back to him, looking out at the city. She turned as he entered. In the daylight flooding through those windows, she looked different from the woman he'd met at Starbucks. Sharper, more intimidating. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Rivers, thank you for coming." Michael stayed near the door, every instinct screaming that he was out of place. "Security said it was a mandatory briefing." "I lied. I'm sorry." Victoria gestured toward the chairs facing her desk. "Please sit. We need to talk about something important." Michael sat because refusing felt impossible. Victoria sat across from him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Then she opened a folder on her desk and slid it across to him. "8 months ago, you applied for a position with this company, senior security analyst. We rejected you without an interview." Michael's hands went cold. "I remember." The rejection was wrong, not just procedurally wrong, morally wrong. Victoria pulled out another piece of paper. "Yesterday, I learned about your application. I've spent the last 24 hours learning about you, about June 15th, 2021, about Jennifer and Sophie, about Lucas." The room tilted. Michael's vision narrowed to a pinpoint, then expanded too wide. She'd investigated him. She knew. Everyone always knew eventually, but having Victoria Sterling, having her sit there with her wealth and her power and her pity, made Michael want to run. "With all due respect, Miss Sterling, that's none of your business." His voice came out harder than intended. "You're right, and I apologize for the invasion. But Michael," she leaned forward, "I needed to understand why our system failed you. Why we rejected someone with your qualifications. And what I found," her voice caught, "what you did quitting your career to care for Lucas through his trauma, that wasn't an employment gap. That was an act of profound courage." "I'm not a hero." The words tasted bitter. "I'm the reason my wife and daughter are dead. A drunk driver is the reason I was driving." Michael stood abruptly, the chair scraping across expensive flooring. "I was behind the wheel. Jennifer wanted to drive, but I said no because I'd slept better and she was tired. So I drove, and when that truck came across the median, I couldn't." His voice broke. "I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save them. That's not courage. That's punishment I'm still serving." Victoria stood too, but she didn't approach him. "Michael, you saved Lucas." "Barely. He was in the back seat. The car seat." Michael pressed his hands against his temples, trying to push back the memory. "I checked that car seat 5 times before we left. 5 times because I'm paranoid, because I need everything to be perfect and safe. And the one thing I couldn't control was the drunk coming across the median at 70 miles an hour. You kept your son together through 18 months of therapy. You sold your patents, your life's work to pay for his care. You sacrificed everything to give him stability." Victoria's voice was steady. "That's not punishment. That's love." Michael turned away from her, staring out at Manhattan because he couldn't look at her face. "Why am I here? What do you want?" "I want to offer you a job. The one you applied for 8 months ago. Senior security analyst, 140,000 base salary, flexible hours built around Lucas's schedule. School pickup at 3. Not a problem. Therapy appointments. Take them. Lucas is sick. Go home, no questions asked." The silence stretched long enough for Michael to count his heartbeats. 15, 20, 30. This is a pity hire. This is a correction. Our HR department failed you because they prioritize bureaucracy over humanity. I'm fixing that failure. You're offering me this because I bought you coffee. I'm offering this because you're qualified. The coffee just made me notice you. Victoria moved closer still, careful to leave space between them. Michael, I've spent 10 years building this company. I built it to be better than the places I came from. And somewhere along the way, I created a system that rejects people for being human, for having gaps and complications and lives that don't fit neatly on a resume. You're not my first mistake, but you're the one I can fix. Michael turned to face her. I need to think about it, and I need to talk to Lucas. Of course. One more thing. Michael held her gaze. If I take this job, there's one condition that's non-negotiable. Lucas comes first. Always. Work is second. If there's ever a conflict, if you ever expect me to choose company over my son, I walk. No notice, no explanation. I just walk. Victoria didn't hesitate. I wouldn't want it any other way. Michael left her office with his head spinning, took the elevator down to the lobby, and walked out into the morning sun without any clear memory of moving. His phone was already ringing. Miss Chen calling to confirm Lucas had made it to school safely, and Michael answered on autopilot, reassured her, hung up, and just stood there on the sidewalk while Manhattan flowed around him. A job offer, a real job with real money doing work he'd been trained for and loved. Everything he'd lost 3 years ago being offered back on a silver platter by a woman who'd read his file and decided his trauma was acceptable. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab this lifeline with both hands and not let go. Part of him wanted to run because accepting meant trusting someone, and trust was a luxury Michael had lost the right to. He made it home by noon, tried to sleep and couldn't, and spent the afternoon cleaning an apartment that was already clean. At 3:15, Lucas burst through the door with his usual chaos backpack hitting the floor, shoes kicked off in opposite directions. Michael caught him in a hug. How was school? Fine. Lucas pulled back and looked up at Michael with serious eyes too old for nine. Was your meeting okay? Yeah, buddy, it was fine. You don't look fine. Michael knelt down. Can we talk about something important? Lucas's face went carefully neutral. Changes meant danger. Michael knew that expression too well. They sat at the kitchen table and Michael explained as simply as he could. A different job, better money, same hours, same pickup schedule, same everything except Dad would be doing computer work instead of security. Lucas listened without interrupting, which was either a good sign or a terrible one. When Michael finished, Lucas asked the only question that mattered. Will you be home after school? Every day, 3 o'clock, just like now. In therapy, every Tuesday and Thursday. Lucas thought about it, small face scrunched in concentration. Do we need the money? Michael's heart clenched. Why do you ask? I heard Mrs. Chen talking to you about rent. And I know we don't have much food sometimes. Lucas's voice was matter of fact, no accusation, just observation. I'm not dumb, Dad. You're not dumb, you're too smart. Michael reached across the table. We're okay, Luke. But yes, this job would help. A lot. Then you should take it. Lucas said it with the decisiveness of someone who had already worked through all the angles. But Bennett, yeah, can I meet her first? The lady who's giving you the job? Why baya? Lucas's expression turned serious in a way that made Michael's chest hurt. Because if she's going to be important, if you're going to work for her and see her every day, I need to know if she's safe, if she's good. Michael pulled his son into a hug, feeling the small body that had survived an impact that killed two people, that had endured nightmares in therapy, and a father who was doing his best but would never be enough. Yeah, buddy, we can arrange that. That night, after Lucas was asleep with Charlie clutched against his chest, Michael sat on the fire escape and looked at the Brooklyn skyline. Manhattan glittered in the distant city of 8 million stories, and somewhere in one of those towers, Victoria Sterling was probably still working, probably still trying to fix the system she'd built. Michael thought about Jennifer, about the last thing she'd said before they got in the car that day, I love you both so much, and wondered what she'd think of this offer. She'd tell him to take it. Jennifer had always been the brave one. Michael called Victoria's office line, not expecting her to answer, at 10 p.m. She picked up on the second ring. Michael, I'll take the job. The words came out fast before he could second guess. Lucas wants to meet you first, to make sure he stopped searching for the right word, safe. I'd be honored to meet him. Victoria's voice was warm. How about Saturday lunch? I know a place that makes the best mac and cheese in the city. He'd like that. Good. A pause. Michael, thank you for trusting me. Don't make me regret it. I won't. Michael hung up and sat there on the fire escape a while longer, thinking about second chances and what it meant to rebuild a life from rubble. Below him, Brooklyn hummed with its own rhythms, and for the first time in 3 years, Michael felt something that might have been hope. Saturday came. The diner was loud and bright and perfect for a nervous 9-year-old who needed distraction. Lucas hid behind Michael at first, peeking around his father's arm at Victoria like she might bite. But she knelt down to his level and asked about the dragon drawing sticking out of his backpack, and that was the magic key. 20 minutes later, Lucas was explaining the difference between Chinese and European dragons with the passionate intensity of someone who'd found their special interest. Victoria listened like she cared, not the fake adult listening where you're really just waiting for the kid to stop talking, but actual engaged attention. She asked questions that showed she understood what he was saying. And when Lucas accidentally knocked over his water glass, she laughed and helped clean it up instead of making it a big deal. Michael watched his son slowly relax, watched the careful mask slip enough to show glimpses of the kid Lucas had been before the accident. The kid who laughed easily and trusted quickly and hadn't learned yet that the world could take everything in a single instant. As they left the diner, Lucas grabbed Michael's hand and looked up at Victoria. "You're okay, you can give Dad the job." Victoria's eyes went bright, but she didn't cry. "Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot to me." Lucas's voice got smaller. "Don't hurt him. He's already been hurt enough." Victoria knelt down again, meeting Lucas's eyes directly. "I promise I'll try my very best not to." Lucas nodded satisfied, and that was that. The vetting was complete. 2 weeks later, Michael started his first day at Tech Vision. Not as a security guard, but as a senior security analyst on the 32nd floor, where the air smelled like coffee and ambition instead of floor polish and night shifts. David Chen, the chief technology officer, greeted him with skepticism barely concealed behind professional courtesy. "So you're Victoria's special project." Michael met his eyes steadily. "I'm someone who used to be very good at this work. I need to prove I still am." David's expression flickered with something like respect. "You have 2 weeks. Impress me or I tell Victoria she made a mistake. Give me 1 week and one real problem. I'll show you exactly who I am." David pulled up a file on his computer. Authentication server's been having intermittent lockout issues for 8 months. 3 senior engineers haven't been able to crack it. That's your problem. Report Friday with solutions. Michael took the file and sat down at the desk. They'd assigned him a real desk with a real computer and a nameplate that read, "Michael Rivers, Senior Security Analyst," and felt something in his chest unlock that had been frozen for 3 years. He logged into the system, pulled up the authentication server architecture, and let his mind start working the way it used to, seeing patterns and vulnerabilities and solutions hidden in the code. Hours passed, Michael barely noticed. He was deep in the logs when his phone alarm went off, 2:45, 15 minutes to pick up. He saved his work, logged off, and headed for the elevator. David watched him go with an expression Michael couldn't read. At 3 o'clock, Michael was standing outside PS 321 when Lucas emerged with his class. His son's face lit up when he saw him. "Dad, you made it. Always will, buddy." They walked home together, Lucas chattering about his day, and Michael felt the particular warmth of having kept a promise. Work could be important, but Lucas would always be first. Back in his apartment that night after Lucas was asleep, Michael returned to his laptop and the problem David had given him. He worked until 2 a.m. tracing code paths and testing theories, and when he finally found the vulnerability, a time zone validation bug that was causing authentication failures for users in certain locations, he felt the particular satisfaction of solving something that had defeated others. He wrote up his findings, not just the bug, but the root cause and long-term fix, and sent it to David at 6 a.m. Then he got Lucas ready for school and went to work wondering if he'd proven himself or just raised the bar impossibly high. David called him into his office at 9. "You found it." "Yes. In 3 days, 3 senior engineers spent 8 months. I got lucky." Luck is being ready when opportunity appears. David leaned back in his chair. "Victoria was right about you. I apologize for doubting." Michael nodded, accepting the apology. He spent the rest of the week implementing the fix, documenting the process, and training the team on the new validation protocol. The skepticism that had greeted him on day one gradually shifted to something closer to respect. He wasn't Victoria's charity project. He was someone who knew what he was doing. But late Friday afternoon, as Michael was preparing to leave for Lucas's pickup, he noticed something odd in the server logs. An attempted intrusion he hadn't flagged before, timestamp 3:47 a.m. from 3 weeks earlier. The same time Victoria's banking had been compromised. Same IP range, Cayman Islands. Michael pulled the full log, traced the access patterns, and felt his blood go cold. This wasn't random. Someone had been systematically probing TechVision's security, specifically targeting executive accounts. And they'd done it multiple times over the past 18 months. He flagged the logs, encrypted them in a secure folder, and made a note to investigate further. But didn't report it yet. Not without more evidence. Not without knowing who and why. Michael grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, but the question followed him all the way to Lucas's school, who would want to destroy Victoria Sterling badly enough to spend 18 months planning it. Michael's first weeks at TechVision established patterns that would define everything to come. He arrived at 7 each morning, worked with focused intensity until 2:45, and left regardless of what crisis might be brewing. The team learned quickly that if something needed Michael's attention after 3 p.m., it would wait until tomorrow. No exceptions, no apologies. Derek Martinez, the cocky 28-year-old engineer who'd made snide comments about charity cases on Michael's first week, came around on day 12. He'd been wrestling with an encryption problem for 6 hours, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. Michael had noticed but said nothing, respecting the boundary that Derek's pride had erected. But when Derek finally slammed his keyboard hard enough to make nearby engineers look up, Michael walked over. Need a second pair of eyes. Derek's jaw worked. Accepting help meant admitting defeat, and defeat meant weakness. But his code was a tangled mess on screen, and Michael was already looking at it with the same focused attention he brought to everything. XOR operations running in wrong sequence. Michael didn't touch Derek's keyboard, didn't take over. Walk me through what you're trying to accomplish. Derek explained, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Michael asked questions that seemed simple but weren't guiding Derek toward the solution without giving it outright. 20 minutes later, Derek's eyes widened. The padding, I'm applying it before the key derivation instead of after. Try it. Derek's fingers flew. The code compiled, ran, worked. He sat back staring at his screen like it had personally betrayed him by hiding such an obvious mistake. Why didn't you just tell me? Michael was already walking back to his desk. Because next time I won't be here at 2:45 to save you. You needed to understand the logic, not memorize my answer. After that, Derek started bringing Michael problems before they became crises. Sarah Chen, a 30-year-old senior engineer with a cautious approach to new hires, watched this dynamic shift with interest. She'd been at TechVision long enough to see Victoria's pet projects come and go, and she'd assumed Michael would be another well-intentioned failure. But there was something different about the way he worked, methodical without being rigid, knowledgeable without being condescending. He treated their junior engineers like colleagues worth teaching instead of subordinates to command. Still, Michael remained isolated. When Sarah invited him to Friday happy hour, he declined without elaborating. When Tom Bradley suggested lunch at the new Thai place everyone was trying, Michael ate a sandwich at his desk while reading security journals. When the team celebrated Derek's birthday with cake in the break room, Michael sent his regards via email and kept working. He's brilliant, but he's a ghost, Sarah told David Chen one evening after most of the team had left. Like he doesn't want anyone to get close. David looked up from his laptop. His wife and daughter died 3 years ago. Son has PTSD. You expecting him to be social? I'm not expecting anything. I'm just saying he's going to burn out if he doesn't have any connection beyond work and his kid. Maybe that's all he can handle right now. Sarah dropped it, but the observation lingered. Michael was solving problems at a rate that made the rest of the team look pedestrian, but he was doing it from behind walls that seemed unscalable. And Sarah, who prided herself on building team cohesion, couldn't figure out how to reach someone who'd made himself unreachable. Michael was aware of their concern and didn't care. Friendship required vulnerability, and vulnerability was how people got hurt. He'd learned that lesson watching Jennifer's casket lowered into the ground while Lucas clung to his leg and asked why mommy wasn't waking up. Connection was a luxury for people who hadn't lost everything. Michael was here to work to provide for Lucas to rebuild some small measure of the life that had been taken from them. Everything else was optional. But the investigation into the Cayman Islands IP address wasn't optional. Michael worked on it during lunch breaks and the odd quiet moments when his assigned projects were complete, building a file that grew more concerning with each layer he uncovered. The intrusion attempts dated back 18 months, always targeting executive accounts, always stopped by security protocols, but getting closer each time. Whoever was behind this was learning TechVision's defenses, probing for weaknesses, planning something larger than simple data theft. Michael traced the IP to a shell company called Harrington Capital Offshore Holdings. The name Harrington made his stomach tighten. He pulled up TechVision's board roster and found Richard Harrington listed as an 8% shareholder. A board member was actively trying to hack the company he was supposed to protect. The question was why, and whether Victoria knew. Michael encrypted his findings into a secure folder and made copies on 3 separate drives. He didn't report it yet because he didn't know who to trust. If Richard had been inside the system for 18 months, he might have allies. Reporting to the wrong person could tip him off and destroy evidence. Instead, Michael kept digging, kept following the digital breadcrumbs Richard had left behind. And 3 weeks into his employment at TechVision, the answer clicked into place. He was reviewing old board meeting minutes, public record for shareholders, when he found references to Daniel Sterling, Victoria's father. The language was effusive, bordering on worship. Daniel Sterling, visionary founder. Daniel Sterling, who'd built Sterling Technologies from nothing and sold it to TechVision for $200 million. Daniel Sterling, who died of a heart attack 5 years ago, leaving his daughter to carry his legacy. Michael searched deeper, moving beyond TechVision's sanitized history into newspaper archives and business journals. And there, buried in a 1998 article from the Boston Globe, he found the story Victoria probably didn't know he'd uncovered. Daniel Sterling and Richard Harrington had been partners once. They'd founded a startup together in the late 90s, split ownership 50-50, and developed proprietary networking technology that should have made them both rich. But 6 months before their planned IPO, Daniel had forced Richard out. The article was vague on details, irreconcilable differences, and creative disagreements, but the outcome was clear. Daniel kept the company, kept the patents, and went on to build an empire. Richard got nothing. Michael sat back from his computer pieces falling into place. This wasn't about money or corporate espionage. This was revenge. Richard Harrington had spent 25 years watching Daniel Sterling succeed with technology they'd built together, watching him become a legend, while Richard remained nobody. And when Daniel died, Richard had transferred that rage to Victoria. The declined credit card, the hacking attempts, the board meeting where Richard had publicly humiliated Victoria about her hiring practices, while simultaneously praising her father's ruthlessness. It was all designed to break her, to prove she was unworthy of Daniel's legacy, to destroy what Daniel had built through his daughter. Michael needed to tell Victoria, but approaching the CEO with accusations against a board member required evidence beyond circumstantial, and he didn't have enough yet. He needed to catch Richard in the act, needed proof that would hold up beyond reasonable doubt. The opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon in Michael's 5th week. He'd just finished implementing new firewall protocols when his monitoring system flagged unusual activity. Someone was attempting to access the financial servers, the ones containing quarterly earnings data, that wouldn't be public for another 3 weeks. The access request came from an IP address that bounced through 6 proxies before terminating in the Cayman Islands. Michael's fingers flew across his keyboard. He isolated the intrusion, traced the access patterns, and documented everything in real time. The attacker was sophisticated, using techniques that suggested military-grade training. But they'd made one mistake. They'd accessed the system during business hours from a location that could be traced back to Harrington Capital's offshore accounts. Michael grabbed his phone, Victoria's office line. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Ms. Sterling, this is Michael Rivers. We have a situation. Someone's trying to access the financial servers right now. I've isolated them, but I need your authorization to pursue and document." Victoria's voice went sharp with focus. "Authorization granted. Whatever you need. I'm going to trace the intrusion and build a case file. This isn't random. This is someone who knows our systems. Do not tell anyone on the board until I have complete evidence. Understood. Keep me updated. Michael hung up and dove back into the code. For the next 4 hours, he tracked every move the intruder made, building a digital paper trail that would be undeniable in court. The attacker was good, but Michael was better. By the time they realized they had been caught and withdrew, Michael had enough evidence to bury them. He called Victoria at 8 p.m. I have everything. Can you come to my desk? She arrived 10 minutes later, her heels clicking against the floor. The office was mostly empty, just a few workaholics scattered across the floor. Michael pulled up his findings on a secondary monitor. The intrusion attempt targeted pre-release financial data. If successful, whoever's behind this could use it for insider trading, buy or sell based on information the public doesn't have yet. He pulled up the trace logs. The IP bounces through multiple proxies, but the final destination is here. He highlighted the Cayman Islands address. Harrington Capital Offshore Holdings. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed. Richard. It gets worse. Michael pulled up the historical logs. This isn't the first attempt. He's been trying to breach our systems for 18 months. Your declined credit card. That was him too. He locked your personal banking to embarrass you before the board meeting where he criticized your hiring practices. Victoria sank into a nearby chair. My father and Richard were partners 25 years ago. Dad forced him out before their IPO and took everything. Her voice was hollow. I didn't make the connection. I thought Richard bought shares because he saw value in the company, but he's been planning this the whole time. Revenge, Michael pulled up the 1998 article. He wants to destroy what your father built, and he's doing it through you. Victoria stared at the screen for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge that could cut glass. How much evidence do you have? Enough for the FE, enough for the SEC, enough to put him in prison for a decade if they prosecute fully. Then we go to the FBI tonight, right now. Michael hesitated. There's another option. We could feed Richard false information. Let him think he succeeded in getting the financial data, but the data is wrong. When he tries to trade on it, we catch him in the act with even more evidence. Victoria's eyes lit with something fierce. You want to trap him. I want to make sure this sticks. Right now, we have attempted intrusion. But if we catch him actually using the stolen data, that's a slam dunk case. Do it, Victoria stood. Whatever you need, whatever resources you have them. I want Richard Harrington to understand what happens when you underestimate people. That conversation happened on a Thursday. By Friday, Michael had prepared the trap. By Monday, Richard had taken the bait. And by Wednesday morning, Michael had enough evidence to guarantee a conviction that would make headlines. But Wednesday brought an email from Victoria marked urgent. Board meeting 10 a.m. Richard had called it claiming he had information about security vulnerabilities that required immediate executive attention. He was preparing to attack to use whatever leverage he thought he had to push Victoria out of the CEO position. Michael showed up to the boardroom at 9:55, uninvited, but carrying a laptop with all the evidence loaded. David Chen was already there looking confused. The board members filed in 12 people who controlled TechVision's future, and at the head of the table in Victoria's chair sat Richard Harrington. He looked up when Michael entered, his expression flickering from surprise to annoyance. Mr. Rivers, this is a closed board meeting. Victoria entered behind Michael. He's here at my invitation. Michael's been investigating the security breaches you called this meeting about. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then perhaps he can explain how our systems have been compromised under his watch. I'd be happy to. Michael connected his laptop to the projection system. As of 6 a.m. this morning, we've documented 47 intrusion attempts over the past 18 months, all targeting executive accounts and financial servers. The attacker used military-grade protocols and routed through multiple proxies to hide their location. He brought up the first slide. But they made mistakes. The room went silent. Richard's expression remained neutral, but Michael saw his jaw tighten. I traced the intrusions to their source, a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Harrington Capital Offshore Holdings. Michael pulled up the corporate registration documents. Owned by Richard Harrington. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other, demanding explanations, looking between Richard and Victoria, with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. Thomas Chen, the eldest board member, raised his hand for silence. These are serious accusations, Mr. Rivers. Do you have proof? I have irrefutable proof. Michael pulled up the logs, the traces, the timeline. But that's not all. 3 days ago, Mr. Harrington successfully breached our financial servers and downloaded next quarter's earnings report data that won't be public for 2 more weeks. He paused. Except the data he stole was false. I seeded the servers with fake information designed to catch whoever was trying to commit insider trading. Richard stood, his face flushed. This is absurd. I'm a board member. I have legitimate access to financial data. You have access to finalized reports approved by the full board. You don't have access to pre-release data stored on secured servers. Michael pulled up trading records. And yet yesterday, Harrington Capital took out a $15 million short position betting TechVision's stock will drop significantly, based on the false earnings data I planted. Thomas Chen leaned forward. Richard, is this true? Richard's expression cracked. You don't understand. Daniel Sterling stole everything from me. 25 years ago, we were partners. We built that technology together. And he forced me out, took my life's work, made himself a billionaire his voice broke. While I got nothing. This company exists because of my ideas, my work. Victoria inherited something that should have been mine. Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. So you tried to destroy it, destroy me. I tried to take back what was owed to me. By committing securities fraud, by hacking corporate systems, by stealing confidential data. Victoria stood facing Richard across the table. My father wronged you. I don't dispute that. What he did was unethical and probably illegal. But I am not my father, and this company is not your revenge. Thomas Chen pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyers and the FBI. Richard, I strongly suggest you retain counsel. Richard looked around the room, seeing his plan collapse. You think you've won? You think exposing me changes anything? This company is rotten at its core, built on stolen ideas and sterling arrogance. Victoria's just like her father, pretending to care about people while stepping on anyone in her way. Michael spoke before he could stop himself. Victoria hired me when your own HR department rejected me. She looked past a 3-year gap that everyone else saw as disqualification. She built a system that prioritizes human beings, and you're trying to destroy it because your pride can't accept that someone built something better from your shared foundation. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just guarantees you'll still be bleeding 25 years later. The room went silent. Richard stared at Michael, his expression cycling through rage and something that might have been recognition. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Thomas Chen sighed. I'll handle the legal proceedings. Victoria, I apologize. We should have seen this sooner. Thank you, Thomas. Victoria looked at Michael. Can you send me all the evidence files? The FBI will want everything. Already compiled and encrypted. I'll email them to you. The board meeting dissolved into logistics, lawyers being called, emergency motions being filed, damage control being planned. Michael slipped out and returned to his desk, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. He'd just accused a board member of securities fraud in front of 12 witnesses. Either he was a hero or he'd just destroyed his own career. His phone rang. Victoria. Thank you for everything, for finding this, for building the case, for her voice caught, for defending me. Just doing my job. Michael, what you said about revenge and wounds, that wasn't just about Richard, was it? Michael closed his eyes. No, it wasn't. They hung up, and Michael tried to focus on work, tried to lose himself in code and protocols and problems that had clear solutions. But his mind kept replaying the look on Richard's face, the decades of bitterness crystallized into that single moment of defeat. Michael understood that anger, that need to make someone pay for the unfairness of life. He'd felt it in the hospital waiting room when they told him Jennifer and Sophie were gone. He'd felt it every morning waking up without them, every night putting Lucas to bed alone, every moment remembering that one decision, letting Jennifer rest while he drove, had cost everything. But at some point you had to choose. Keep bleeding or start healing. Keep destroying or start building. Michael had chosen building, even though some days it felt like constructing sandcastles while the tide was coming in. Richard had chosen destruction, and it had consumed 25 years of his life. At 2:45, Michael left for Lucas's pickup. The FBI could wait. The legal proceedings could wait. His son couldn't. But that evening after Lucas was asleep, Michael found himself on the fire escape again, looking at Manhattan's lights. His phone rang. Victoria calling from her personal cell instead of the office line. I couldn't sleep. Thought you might be awake too. What gave me away? The fact that you probably haven't slept well in 3 years. Victoria's voice was soft. Can I tell you something about my father? If you want. Everyone thinks Daniel Sterling was this visionary genius. And maybe he was. But he was also cold and calculating and cruel. He taught me that business was war, that sentiment was weakness, that the only thing that mattered was winning. Victoria paused. I spent 20 years trying to earn his approval. Never got it. When he died, I felt relief. And I hated myself for that relief. Michael understood. Grief isn't clean. It's messy and contradictory, and it doesn't follow rules. Richard said I'm just like my father. And part of me is terrified he's right. That I built this company on the same ruthless foundation that I'm capable of the same cruelty. You're not. Your father would have fired me the day I asked for flexible hours. You offered them without me asking. That doesn't erase the system that rejected you in the first place. No, but recognizing a broken system and fixing it, that's not something ruthless people do. That's something good people do when they're brave enough to see their own mistakes. Silence stretched between them, comfortable instead of awkward. Michael could hear traffic sounds on Victoria's end, could picture her on that penthouse balcony overlooking the city she'd conquered, but couldn't quite claim as home. Can I ask you something? Victoria's voice was careful. When did you know Lucas would be okay? When did you stop being terrified every second? I'll let you know when it happens. Michael's laugh was hollow. I still check his breathing at night like he's an infant. I still panic when he's 5 minutes late coming home from school. The fear never goes away. You just learn to function around it. That sounds exhausting. It is, but so is caring about someone. So is letting yourself be vulnerable enough to love another person. We do it anyway because the alternative is being alone, and humans weren't built for that. Victoria's breath caught. Are you alone, I mean? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Michael thought about Jennifer, about the hole she'd left that nothing could fill. Thought about Lucas, who was everything but also 9 years old and couldn't be his father's entire emotional support system. Thought about Victoria, who'd seen the worst parts of his file and offered him a future anyway. Yeah, I'm alone, but I'm working on being okay with that. What if Victoria stopped, started again? What if you didn't have to be? Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. Victoria, I work for you. Lucas needs stability. We can't. I know all the reasons this is complicated. But Michael, I'm 41 years old. I've spent 2 decades building an empire, and I come home every night to silence. And for the first time since I can remember, I'm talking to someone who sees me as a person instead of a CEO or a means to an end or my father's legacy. So I'm asking hypothetically, theoretically, what if we didn't have to be alone? Michael closed his eyes. Then I'd say I'm terrified, that I haven't felt this way since Jennifer, that the idea of caring about someone again, of letting someone into Lucas's life and risking that loss. His voice broke. I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that twice. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I needed to say it out loud, to admit that this isn't just professional respect or gratitude. That when I see you with Lucas, when you leave every day at 2:45, regardless of what's burning, when you talk about her without pretending she didn't exist, I see the kind of person I want to become. The kind who prioritizes what actually matters instead of what looks impressive. Michael's throat tightened. You're already that person. You just needed permission to show it. Maybe we both need permission. They talked for another hour, circling around feelings neither was ready to name, but both were beginning to acknowledge. When they finally hung up, Michael sat on the fire escape until his legs went numb from cold, thinking about the distance between terror and hope, between what was safe and what was possible. Inside, Lucas stirred in his sleep, crying out. Michael rushed to his room, found his son tangled in sheets, eyes open, but not seeing. Night terrors, they'd been rare lately, but still surfaced when stress crept in. Hey, buddy. Dad's here. You're safe. Michael gathered Lucas against his chest, feeling the small body shake. Just a dream. You're safe. They were leaving. Lucas's voice was thick with sleep and fear. Mom and Sophie were walking away, and I couldn't follow. They said I had to stay, but they couldn't. It was just a dream, Luke. They loved you so much. They'd never leave you by choice. Lucas clung tighter. Promise, I promise. Lucas is pulled back slightly, looking up with eyes too aware for a child pulled from nightmares. Is Victoria nice? The question caught Michael off guard. Yeah, buddy, she's nice. Are you going to marry her? Michael's breath stopped. What makes you ask that? You smile when you talk about her, like you used to smile about Mom. Lucas's expression was serious. It's okay if you do. I don't think Mom would be mad. Michael pulled Lucas close again, his chest aching. No decisions happening anytime soon, Luke. But thank you for saying that. Okay. Lucas yawned, already drifting back towards sleep. Just don't forget that I have to meet her more first. To make sure. Wouldn't dream of it. Michael stayed until Lucas's breathing evened out until he was sure the nightmares had passed. Then he returned to the fire escape, to the cold air and the distant lights, and thought about a 9-year-old giving him permission to heal. Friday brought the FBI. 2 agents in dark suits interviewed Michael for 3 hours, going through every piece of evidence, every log file, every documented intrusion. Richard's lawyer was already making noise about entrapment and wrongful accusation, but the evidence was overwhelming. By end of day, Richard Harrington was in federal custody, and TechVision's stock had actually risen 2 points on news that they'd caught and stopped a major security breach before it caused damage. Victoria called an all-company meeting at 4 p.m. after Michael had already left for Lucas's pickup. He listened to it later via the recording she sent him. Her voice was clear and certain as she explained what had happened, how they'd caught it, and what changes would be implemented going forward. She mentioned Michael by name, called him instrumental in protecting the company, and announced a new security initiative that would carry his name, the Rivers Protocol. Michael listened to that part twice, his throat tight. Victoria was giving him credit, making sure everyone knew this wasn't CEO heroics, but the work of someone she trusted, someone she valued, someone who belonged. Monday morning, Michael arrived to find his desk covered in notes from colleagues. Thank you messages, congratulations, respect that felt genuine instead of performative. Derek had left a coffee and a sticky note. Guess you really are that good, sorry for doubting. Sarah Chen stopped by mid-morning. So, security superstar, you free for lunch? Michael started to decline automatically, then stopped. He'd been at TechVision for 6 weeks. He'd proven himself. And maybe it was time to try being something other than isolated. Yeah, I'm free. They went to the Thai place Sarah had suggested weeks ago. The conversation stayed light, office gossip, funny stories, nothing that required vulnerability. But it was a start, a small crack in the walls Michael had built, just enough to let in a little light. That afternoon, Victoria's assistant called. Could Michael come to her office? Not a security briefing this time, just a conversation. Michael took the elevator up, knocked once, and entered to find Victoria standing by the windows, her posture tense. The FBI arrested Richard this morning. He's being charged with securities fraud, computer fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His lawyer's already talking about a plea deal, but the prosecutor says he's looking at 15 to 20 years. Good. Michael meant it. His daughter called me. Victoria's voice was quiet. Sarah. She's 32. She said she hasn't spoken to her father in 8 years because he wouldn't let go of the grudge against my dad. She begged me to let go to forgive him to stop the prosecution. What did you tell her? That I'm not prosecuting him, the federal government is. That I'm sorry her father chose revenge over her. And that I hope she finds peace even if he never does. Victoria turned to face Michael. Was that cold? Am I being like my father? Your father would have destroyed Richard, quietly made sure he never worked again, and felt nothing. You're giving Sarah compassion you don't owe her and feeling guilty about holding her father accountable for crimes he actually committed? That's not cold, that's human. Victoria's eyes glistened. I talked to a therapist yesterday, first time in 10 years. She said I have attachment issues and control issues, and that I've been using work to avoid dealing with my father's emotional neglect. Therapists love giving you multiple diagnoses in the first session. Lucas sees Dr. Kim, right? The child psychologist. Michael nodded. Would she do? You think she'd talk to me, not as Lucas's doctor, but as someone who might have insight into how I can, Victoria's voice broke, how I can be around him without screwing it up. Because Michael, if this becomes something, I need to know how not to hurt your son. Michael's heart stopped and restarted. You're thinking about us, about really trying this. I'm terrified of trying this, but I'm more terrified of not trying and spending the next 20 years wondering what if. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. Lucas's school. His stomach dropped. This is Michael Rivers. Mr. Rivers, this is Principal Watts. Lucas had an incident in class today. He's fine physically, but emotionally we think you should come. Michael was already moving toward the door. What happened? Mrs. Patterson assigned a family tree project. Lucas became very upset and had to leave the classroom. He's with the counselor now. Michael hung up his world, narrowing to a single point of focus. I have to go. I'll drive you. Victoria grabbed her keys. It'll be faster than the subway. They didn't argue. Victoria drove in silence while Michael sat in the passenger seat, hands clenched, mind racing through possibilities. A family tree project. Lucas would have had to diagram Jennifer and Sophie, would have had to label them with dates, would have had to make their absence official and permanent in a way that triggered every trauma response he'd spent 3 years learning to manage. Victoria's car pulled up to PS 321 14 minutes later. Michael was out before she'd fully stopped running through doors he'd walked through hundreds of times for pickup. The counselor's office was on the second floor. Mrs. Lopez met him at the door. He's calmer now. But Michael, there's something you should know. What? Lucas told his class that Jennifer and Sophie were alive. He's been telling that story for 2 weeks. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. What? When Mrs. Patterson asked students to write about their families, Lucas wrote about his mother and sister in present tense. She thought it was beautiful, used it as an example, and Lucas? Mrs. Lopez's expression was pained. He didn't correct her. He's been maintaining the fiction that they're still alive, until today, when he had to draw the family tree and couldn't sustain it anymore. Michael pushed past her into the office. Lucas was sitting on the couch, knees pulled to chest, face blotchy from crying. He looked up when Michael entered, and his expression crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to lie. Michael crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Lucas into his arms. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. I just wanted, Lucas sobbed into Michael's shirt. When Mrs. Patterson said my writing was beautiful, everyone looked at me like I was special instead of broken. And I thought maybe if I pretended long enough, it could be true. Michael's chest felt like it was caving in. He looked up to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met across the room, and Michael saw in her expression everything he was feeling, the helplessness, the grief, the desperate wish to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Lucas. Michael pulled back just enough to see his son's face. You are special. Not because Mom and Sophie are here or gone, but because you're you. You're brave and smart, and you survived something that would break most adults. And you don't ever have to pretend with me. But everyone will know I'm broken now. You're not broken, you're healing. There's a difference. The Victoria spoke from the doorway, her voice gentle. Lucas, can I tell you something? Lucas looked at her, surprised she was there. When I was your age, my dad was never home. He was always working, always busy, always somewhere more important. And I used to tell kids at school that he was a spy, that he couldn't tell me about his work because it was classified. I kept that lie going for 2 years. Victoria stepped into the room, because admitting the truth that my dad didn't want to spend time with me hurt too much. Lucas wiped his eyes. What happened? Eventually, a teacher called my dad for parent conference. He showed up in a suit, clearly from the office, clearly annoyed to be there. And everyone realized he wasn't a spy, just a businessman who didn't care enough to hide his priorities. Victoria knelt beside the couch. I was so embarrassed. But you know what the weird part was? After everyone knew the truth, I felt lighter. Like I could stop pretending and just be sad when I needed to be sad. Lucas considered this. Did your dad ever get better? No, he stayed the same until he died. But I got better at accepting who he was instead of wishing he was different. That's sad. Yeah, it is. Victoria looked at Michael. But your dad isn't like mine. He gave up his whole career to make sure you'd be okay. That's real love, Lucas. The kind that doesn't need pretending. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Victoria with his two old eyes. Are you going to be part of our family? Victoria's breath caught. She looked at Michael, a question in her expression. Michael gave the smallest nod. I'd like to be, if you're okay with that. Will you replace my mom? Never. Your mom was special and irreplaceable. But I could be, Victoria searched for words. I could be someone who loves you both and tries really hard to be worthy of that family. Lucas thought about it. Then he reached out and took Victoria's hand. Okay, but you have to like dragons. That's required. Victoria laughed, the sound breaking through tension. I love dragons. I have a whole library of dragon books. Good, because I need someone to read them with, since Dad doesn't always get the mythology right. Michael felt something in his chest unlock some tightness he'd been carrying for 3 years without acknowledging its weight. Here, in a school counselor's office, his son was giving permission for the future to look different from the past. And Victoria, who'd spent 41 years being her father's daughter, was promising to be herself instead. Mrs. Lopez cleared her throat. I think Lucas should stay home tomorrow, process what happened, come back fresh on Wednesday. Michael nodded. They left together, him, Lucas, and Victoria, walking out into the afternoon sun. Lucas held both their hands swinging between them like a bridge connecting two islands. Can we get pizza? Lucas asked. Whatever you want, buddy. And can Victoria come? Michael looked at Victoria. She looked back, hope and terror mixing in her eyes. Yeah, Victoria can come. They ate pizza in Michael's small Brooklyn apartment, the three of them crowded around a table meant for two. Lucas told Victoria about his dragon books, his friends at school, his plans to become a paleontologist or maybe an astronaut. Victoria listened with the kind of attention Michael remembered from that first meeting, treating a 9-year-old's dreams with the same seriousness she'd give a board presentation. After Lucas went to bed, Michael and Victoria sat on the fire escape, shoulders touching, watching Brooklyn's lights compete with Manhattan's across the water. Thank you, Michael's voice was rough, for what you said to Lucas about your father. I meant it, all of it. I know you did. That's what makes it matter. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm still terrified. Of this, of us, of everything I could mess up. Good. Fear means you care, and caring is what makes the risk worth taking. They sat in comfortable silence, not needing words to fill the space. Tomorrow would bring more complications, FBI interviews, board restructuring, the slow work of building trust between three people who'd all been broken in different ways. But tonight, in this moment, they were just two adults learning to be vulnerable, and one child learning it was safe to be himself. Michael thought about Richard Harrington, about 25 years of rage that had consumed a life. And he made a choice, the same choice he'd been making every day since the accident. To build instead of destroy. To heal instead of bleed. To risk loving again despite knowing exactly how much it could cost. Jennifer would have approved. She'd always been the brave one. 3 months after Lucas's breakdown over the family tree project, the world looked different from Michael's fire escape. Not better was too simple a word for the complicated tapestry of grief and hope that now defined their lives, but different. Richer somehow. Less empty. Victoria had become a fixture in their routine without either of them planning it. She showed up for Friday pizza nights, learned which subjects made Lucas light up and which made him withdraw, sat through endless dragon documentaries without complaint. She never tried to mother Lucas, never overstepped the boundaries that grief had drawn. Instead, she existed alongside their healing, a steady presence that asked nothing except to be included. The Rivers Initiative, launched on a cold November morning, announced at a company-wide meeting that Victoria insisted Michael attend despite his preference for staying invisible. The conference room on the 42nd floor was packed, 200 employees crammed into a space meant for 150, all of them buzzing with curiosity about the emergency meeting their CEO had called. Victoria stood at the front, poised and professional, in a way that still made Michael's chest tighten. But there was something softer in her now, some edge that had worn smooth over the past months. She'd started therapy twice a week, had stopped checking email after 8 p.m., had learned to say no to board members who thought her time was infinitely divisible. 3 months ago, we discovered that a board member had spent 18 months trying to sabotage this company from within. Victoria's voice carried across the room. But that attack revealed something more important than his crimes. It revealed systematic failures in how we evaluate talent, how we treat people, and what we consider valuable in the humans we employ. She pulled up a slide, Michael's rejected application from 8 months earlier. This is Michael Rivers' job application. MIT degrees, 4 patents still used by the Department of Defense, 15 years of experience. Our HR department rejected him without an interview because of a 3-year employment gap. Victoria paused. That gap existed because Michael's wife and daughter were killed by a drunk driver. He spent those 3 years ensuring his surviving son received the trauma care he desperately needed. Our system saw that devotion as a character flaw. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Michael felt 200 pairs of eyes swivel toward him. He wanted to disappear through the floor. Michael is now our senior security analyst. In 3 months, he's prevented a major data breach, implemented protocols that have reduced our vulnerability metrics by 40%, and mentored a team that's performing at levels we've never seen. Victoria's voice strengthened. He's also taught me something crucial. The gaps in people's resumes are often where their greatest strengths are forged. Another slide appeared, the Rivers Initiative. Effective immediately, Tech Vision is launching a comprehensive second chance hiring program. We will actively recruit candidates with non-traditional backgrounds, employment gaps, career changes, personal crises that force them out of the workforce. We will offer flexible scheduling, remote work options, and support systems for caregivers, parents, and anyone managing personal circumstances alongside their careers. The room erupted in applause. Michael felt his face burn. Sarah Chen was grinning at him from across the room. Derek gave him a thumbs up. David Chen nodded with something that looked like pride. This initiative carries Michael's name because he embodies what we're trying to achieve. He proved that the best employees aren't always the ones with perfect resumes. Sometimes they're the ones who've survived hell and came back stronger. Victoria's eyes found Michael's. We're going to build a company that sees that strength instead of fearing it. After the meeting, Michael was mobbed by colleagues, handshakes, congratulations, questions about implementation. He fielded them with the same patient competence he brought to security protocols, but his mind was elsewhere. Victoria had just put his trauma on display in front of the entire company. She'd meant it as honor, as recognition, but part of him felt exposed in a way that made his skin crawl. He found her in her office an hour later, staring at her computer screen without really seeing it. You should have asked me first, before making my life story company lore. Victoria looked up, surprise flickering across her features. I thought you'd be pleased. I was honoring what you survived. You were using what I survived to make a point. There's a difference. Michael's voice stayed level. I don't want to be the poster child for tragedy overcome. I just wanted to do my job and raise my son. I'm sorry. Victoria stood crossing to where he was standing. You're right. I got caught up in the symbolism and forgot to consider how it would feel from your perspective. That was selfish. Michael's anger deflated. She'd apologized without deflecting, without making excuses. That was rare enough to deserve acknowledgement. The initiative itself, it's good work, important. Just next time, maybe give me a heads up before you broadcast my worst day to 200 people. I will, I promise. They stood in uncomfortable silence until Victoria spoke again, her voice careful. Dr. Kim says Lucas has been doing better. Fewer nightmares, better emotional regulation. She thinks the family tree incident, as traumatic as it was, helped him stop compartmentalizing his grief. He's been drawing Mom and Sophie again. Not as angels this time, just as themselves. He told me yesterday that he's starting to remember the good times without the memories hurting quite as much. Victoria's expression softened. That's real progress. Yeah, it is. Michael met her eyes. He asked me last night when you were going to boo us in. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications they'd been dancing around for months. They'd been careful, so careful to keep things slow, to prioritize Lucas's stability, to avoid rushing into anything that might shatter the fragile equilibrium they'd achieved. But Lucas wasn't stupid. He saw the way his father looked at Victoria, The way she'd started keeping spare clothes in their apartment, the way they all fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been missing its center. What did you tell him? That we're taking things one day at a time, that moving in is a big step that requires lots of conversation. And what do you want? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Not what's practical or careful or best for Lucas. What do you want? Michael thought about Jennifer, about the promise he'd made at her funeral that he'd never love anyone the way he'd loved her. He'd meant it as devotion, as proof that she'd been irreplaceable. But somewhere in the past months, he'd realized that promise was actually fear masquerading as loyalty. Jennifer would have wanted him to be happy, would have wanted Lucas to have a complete family, would have hated the idea of Michael spending the rest of his life in emotional purgatory because moving forward felt like betrayal. I want you to be part of our lives, really part of it, not just visiting. I want Lucas to have someone who chooses to be there. I want, his voice caught, I want to stop being so afraid all the time that happiness is temporary and love is something I used up. Victoria's eyes filled. I'm afraid too. That I'll mess this up, that I'll hurt Lucas, that I don't know how to be part of a family because I never really had one. Then we'll learn together. We'll mess up and apologize and try again. That's what families do. Is that what we are, a family? Michael kissed her then properly for the first time since that night on the fire escape. She tasted like coffee, impossibility, and when they broke apart, her smile was radiant enough to compete with the Manhattan skyline behind her. Yeah, I think we are. 2 weeks later, the federal prosecutor's office called. Richard Harrington had accepted a plea deal, 12 years in federal prison, in exchange for testimony about offshore money laundering schemes that would impact dozens of other cases. His daughter Sarah had stopped calling. Victoria had apparently washed her hands of the father who'd chosen revenge over family. The whole sordid mess was being wrapped up with the efficient brutality of the justice system, processing one more white-collar criminal. But Victoria felt unsettled, victorious but not satisfied. She'd won the battle against Richard, had protected her company, and proven herself capable of defending what she'd built. But something about the way it ended with Richard disappeared into the federal prison system. His daughter estranged, 25 years of rage resulting in nothing but more loss left her hollow. She told Michael she was going to visit Richard before his transfer to the permanent facility. He didn't try to talk her out of it. The federal detention center in Lower Manhattan was designed for temporary holding, not long-term incarceration. Victoria waited in a sterile visiting room while guards brought Richard in wearing orange scrubs that made him look diminished human in a way his expensive suits never had. They sat across from each other with a plexiglass barrier between them, speaking through phones that crackled with static. Come to gloat, Richard's voice carried bitterness, but also exhaustion, like he'd used up his capacity for rage and had nothing left but resignation. I came to apologize for what my father did to you. Richard's expression flickered with surprise. Why, you weren't there. You were probably still in elementary school when Daniel stole my work. But I benefited from that theft. I built my career on a foundation that included your ideas, your contributions. That wasn't right, even if I didn't know about it. Victoria leaned forward. Richard, I looked into the original partnership. I found the contracts, the patent filings, the early prototypes. You contributed 40% of the core technology. My father froze you out illegally and you would have won if you'd sued. But you didn't sue. You just disappeared and let the anger eat you alive for 25 years. Why? Because your father had better lawyers, better connections, better everything. Richard's voice cracked. I was nobody. He was Daniel Sterling, golden boy of Silicon Valley. Who would have believed me? A judge, a jury, the patent office. You had documentation, Richard. You could have fought legally and probably won. Instead, you spent 25 years plotting revenge that accomplished nothing except guaranteeing you'd die angry and alone. Richard looked away, his jaw working. You don't understand what it's like. Watching someone steal your life's work, watching them become a legend while you're forgotten. It consumed me. My father was a terrible man, cold and calculating and cruel. He taught me that success meant stepping on people, that kindness was weakness, that the only thing that mattered was winning. Victoria's voice softened. I spent 41 years trying to earn his approval before I realized I was becoming him. And when Michael Rivers, a man who'd lost everything and rebuilt his life around love instead of anger when he showed me a different way to be, I had to choose. Keep being my father's daughter or become something better. And you think I could have done that? Just let go. I think you had a choice 25 years ago. Sue my father, take what was legally yours and build something new. Or feed the anger until it was all you had left. Victoria paused. Your daughter Sarah called me. Did you know that she begged me to drop the charges to give you another chance? She said she hadn't spoken to you in 8 years because you chose rage over her. Richard, you had someone who loved you, and you threw her away for revenge against a dead man. Richard's face crumpled. He pressed his hand against the plexiglass like he could reach through it, like physical contact might ease the weight of his mistakes. I know. God, I know. Sarah was 8 when her mother left me. I raised her alone, poured everything into her, and then she asked me to let it go, to stop obsessing over your father, to be present for her instead of absent chasing ghosts, and I couldn't. I chose the rage because it felt more real than love. It's not too late to call her, to apologize, to try rebuilding what you destroyed. Yes, it is. She's not answering. She's moved on. Then you spend the next 12 years becoming someone worth answering for. You get therapy, you process the anger, you figure out who Richard Harrington is when he's not defined by what Daniel Sterling took from him. Victoria stood. I forgive you for what you tried to do to me, not because you deserve it, but because carrying grudges destroys the person holding them. My father proved that. You proved it. I'm choosing differently. She left Richard sitting in that sterile room, left him with tears streaming down his face and the weight of wasted decades pressing against his chest. Walking out into the Manhattan afternoon felt like shedding skin, like releasing poison she hadn't known she was carrying. Her father's sins weren't hers to bear. Richard's choices weren't her responsibility. She was allowed to build something new without carrying their failures forward. Michael was waiting outside the detention center, leaning against a lamppost with 2 coffee cups. He handed her one without speaking, letting the silence settle around them like a comfortable blanket. How do you feel? Lighter. Sad for him, but lighter. Victoria sipped the coffee oat milk latte extra shot exactly how she liked it. He wasted his entire adult life on anger. Sarah loved him, and he threw her away. That's his tragedy, not mine. You can't save people who won't save themselves. They walked together through the financial district, past buildings that reached towards sky like prayers in glass and steel. Victoria threaded her arm through Michael's, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of someone who'd chosen healing over destruction. I told my board yesterday that I'm taking December off, first vacation in 5 years. Michael stopped walking. Seriously, I want to spend Christmas with you and Lucas. I want to learn how to be someone who exists outside of quarterly earnings and shareholder meetings. Victoria looked up at him. Is that okay? Having me around for a whole month? More than okay. Lucas has been planning Christmas since Halloween. He's going to lose his mind. Lucas did lose his mind in the best possible way. The morning Victoria told him she'd be there for the entire holiday season, he'd tackled her in a hug so enthusiastic they both nearly fell over. Kim noted in her session notes that Lucas was demonstrating secure attachment behaviors, that his capacity for joy was returning alongside his ability to process grief. Christmas morning arrived with snow dusting, Brooklyn streets, and Lucas bounding into Michael's room at 6 a.m., vibrating with excitement. Michael groaned and checked his phone. Victoria had texted an hour earlier. How early is too early to come over? Lucas is going to implode if I'm not there. She can come now, Michael told his son, who was already on the phone calling her before the sentence was finished. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later with bags of bagels. They ate breakfast in pajamas, the 3 of them crowded around the small table, laughing at nothing and everything. The presents under the tree were modest. Michael's budget couldn't compete with Victoria's wealth, and she'd been careful not to overwhelm Lucas with expensive gifts that might make Michael uncomfortable. But the Dragon Encyclopedia she'd found leather-bound and filled with illustrations from cultures around the world made Lucas's eyes go wide with wonder. And the watch she'd given Michael, nothing flashy, just a simple timepiece with an inscription on the back that read, "For the man who always shows up," made his throat close with emotion. Michael's gift to Victoria was a framed photograph he'd taken without her knowing. It showed her and Lucas on the apartment floor, both of them bent over one of his dragon books, their faces reflecting the same absorbed concentration. The caption underneath read, "Family isn't something you're born into, it's something you build with people who show up." Victoria cried, not the careful tears of someone maintaining composure, but the messy, overwhelming sobs of someone who'd spent 41 years thinking family was something other people had. Lucas hugged her until she stopped shaking, then declared that crying was acceptable at Christmas, as long as there was also hot chocolate, which he promptly insisted on making. That afternoon, after Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch surrounded by wrapping paper and new books, Michael and Victoria sat on the fire escape, despite the cold. She was wearing one of his hoodies 3 sizes too big and had never looked more beautiful. "I want to ask you something." Michael's voice was steady despite his hammering heart. "But I need you to know I'm terrified and also completely certain, which is confusing, but apparently how love works." Victoria turned to face him, her expression shifting from relaxed to alert. "Okay, Lucas and I talked, really talked about what it would mean to make this permanent, about what it would mean for you to be." Michael stopped gathering courage. "To be his mom, not replacing Jennifer, but being present in a way that's real and permanent. He's on board. More than on board, he's been planning what to call you and everything." "Michael, let me finish. I'm terrible at this, and if I stop, I won't start again." He pulled out a small box from his pocket. "This isn't fancy. I couldn't afford fancy, but it's real and it means something." The ring inside was simple silver, no diamonds, just a smooth band that caught the winter light. Victoria stared at it like it might disappear. "I know this is fast by normal standards. I know we've only been together 6 months officially, but I've spent 3 years learning that time is a luxury and tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And I don't want to waste any more days being careful when I could be building something real with someone who," his voice broke, "with someone who sees me and Lucas and loves us anyway, broken parts included." Victoria was crying again as silent tears tracking down her face. "You're not broken. Neither is Lucas. You're both exactly who you're supposed to be. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She was laughing and crying simultaneously, holding out her hand so he could slip the ring on her finger. "God, yes, I want this. I want both of you. I want the messy apartment and the dragon books and the fire escape conversations. I want to be part of something that matters more than quarterly earnings." They kissed while snow began to fall, while Brooklyn hummed with holiday cheer below them, while inside the apartment, Lucas slept peacefully for the first time in years without nightmares. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria's smile could have powered the entire city. "We should tell Lucas. He already knows. He helped me pick the ring." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. "Of course he did. That kid's been managing this relationship better than either of us." They went inside to find Lucas awake, sitting up on the couch with Charlie the dragon and an expectant expression. "Did she say yes?" "She said yes, buddy." Lucas pumped his fist in victory. "Finally, I've been waiting forever." "It's been 6 months. That's forever when you're 9.5. Lucas scrambled off the couch and launched himself at Victoria. "Hi, Mom. That's what I'm calling you, if that's okay." Victoria caught him holding tight while tears streamed freely. "That's more than okay." The wedding happened in June, 6 months after the proposal. They'd considered doing it sooner, but Dr. Kim suggested giving Lucas time to process the change, to see that engagement didn't mean abandonment, that adding Victoria permanently didn't erase Jennifer's memory. So they waited, and the waiting allowed anticipation to build instead of anxiety. The ceremony was held on a rooftop in Brooklyn. 50 people gathered under strings of lights while the sun set over Manhattan. Victoria wore a simple dress that cost less than her usual business suits. Michael wore the same ought he'd worn to accept his job, now professionally tailored instead of fraying at the edges. And Lucas stood between them in his role as ring bearers, holding a pillow he'd decorated himself with dragons breathing wedding rings instead of fire. The officiant was a friend of Dr. Kim's, someone who understood that this wedding was about more than 2 people joining their lives. It was about a family choosing to become whole. She kept her remarks brief, speaking about courage and second chances and the particular bravery required to love again after loss. When it came time for vows, Michael went first. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out the paper he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. Victoria, 6 months ago, I was a man who'd convinced himself that happiness was something that happened to other people, that I'd used up my allotment of good fortune and the rest of my life would be managing loss. His voice steadied. You proved me wrong. Not by fixing anything I'm still grieving. Jennifer and Sophie probably always will be, but by showing me that grief and joy can coexist. That loving you doesn't betray them, it honors them by proving the kind of love they gave me was strong enough to survive even after they were gone. Victoria was already crying. I promise to be worthy of your trust. To remember that work is what I do, but family is who I am. To leave every day at 2:45 because Lucas needs me, but also because you've shown me that being present matters more than being impressive. To love you with the kind of fierce dedication I bring to everything important, which means you're getting the same level of commitment I give to reviewing security protocols, and I apologize in advance for how intense that can be. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Victoria reached for his hand. Her vows were simpler, but no less powerful. Michael, I spent 41 years building walls, convinced that success meant being untouchable. You demolished every wall not by forcing them down, but by being patient enough to wait until I was ready to open the gates. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failure, and that the most important work I'll ever do isn't in a boardroom, it's right here being present for you and Lucas. She turned to include Lucas in her gaze. Both of you showed me what family really means. Not obligation or biology or inheritance, but choice. Choosing to show up every day. Choosing to be honest about the hard stuff. Choosing to love each other through the messy parts instead of only during the easy ones. I choose both of you today and every day after. The officiant pronounced them married. They kissed while their small crowd cheered, while Lucas made exaggerated gagging, noises that made everyone laugh while the city sparkled below them like it was celebrating too. But the most memorable moment came during the reception when Lucas stood up on his chair despite multiple adults telling him chairs weren't for standing and demanded everyone's attention. Michael and Victoria exchanged concerned glances. They'd talked to Lucas about the wedding, about what to expect, but they hadn't prepared speeches. 9-year-olds with microphones were wild cards. Lucas waited until the crowd settled, then spoke with the seriousness of someone delivering crucial information. Hi, I'm Lucas. I'm 9.5 and I wanted to say something about my dad and my new mom. The crowd settled into attentive silence. Michael felt his chest tighten with love and terror in equal measure. 3 years ago, my mom and my sister died. It was really bad. My dad and I were really sad for a long time. Lucas's voice stayed steady, matter of fact. Then Victoria came. She didn't try to replace my mom. Nobody could do that, but she made our family bigger. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Michael recognized his son's concentrated expression, the same one he got when explaining dragon taxonomy. I learned something. Love isn't like money where when you use it, it's gone. It's more like Lucas searched for the right comparison. Like when you light one candle from another candle, the first candle doesn't get smaller. You just have more light. Victoria pressed her hand to her both shoulders shaking with emotion. Michael pulled her close. So my first mom, Jennifer, she's still here. Lucas touched his chest. I still love her and Sophie every day. But now I also love Victoria. And loving Victoria doesn't make me love Mom less. It just means I have more people to love. He held up his cup of apple juice. To my family. All of them. The crowd raised their glasses, many of them blinking back tears. Victoria was openly sobbing now, and Michael's vision had gone blurry. Their 9-year-old son had just delivered a better wedding speech than most adults could manage, had articulated something about love and loss and healing that neither Michael nor Victoria could have expressed so clearly. After Lucas sat down, finally getting off the chair, Victoria pulled him into a fierce hug. Thank you, that was perfect. Dr. Kim helped me practice. She said I should say it simple so people would understand. It was exactly right. Michael joined the hug, the three of them holding each other, while the reception continued around them. You're wiser than both of us, bud. Disarm. I know, it's because I read a lot. The reception wound down as night deepened. Friends and colleagues drifted away, leaving the rooftop to Michael, Victoria, and Lucas. They stood at the railing, looking at Manhattan's lights, reflected in the East River. A family united not by blood, but by choice and courage, and the particular kind of love that grows from surviving impossible things. What now? Victoria's voice was soft. Now we go home. Together. All of us. All of us. They left the rooftop hand in hand, Michael, Victoria, and Lucas, and descended into the Brooklyn night. Tomorrow would bring logistics and paperwork and the practical complications of merging three lives into one household. But tonight was for celebration, for acknowledging that they'd built something precious from pieces no one else had wanted. 1 year later, on a Monday morning in June, they returned to the Starbucks on 42nd Street. Same location where everything had started, same time of day, same order. It had become a tradition, their anniversary of the day Michael had paid for a stranger's coffee and accidentally changed the trajectory of three lives. Marcus was still working the counter, though he'd been promoted to manager. His eyes lit up with recognition when they walked in. "The coffee couple, and you brought the kid this time." Lucas grinned. "Hi, I'm Lucas. Can I get hot chocolate?" "One hot chocolate coming up. And let me guess, grande oat milk latte extra shot regular black coffee." Victoria laughed. "You remember. Hard to forget the woman whose card got declined and the security guard who paid for it. That story's famous around here." Marcus rang them up. "Heard you two got married. Congratulations." "Thank you." Michael pulled out his wallet, extracting a credit card instead of cash. "We're celebrating our anniversary of the day we met." "That's sweet. Most couples celebrate from the first date, not the first transaction." "We're not most couples." Victoria leaned into Michael's shoulder. They waited at the pickup counter, the three of them watching Monday morning Manhattan surge past the windows. Lucas chattered about his summer-planned space camp in August, a trip to the Natural History Museum's new dragon exhibit, possibly convincing his parents that a dog was absolutely necessary for his development as a responsible human being. When their drinks were ready, they stepped outside to make room for the next customers. Michael took a sip of his coffee, still too hot, still exactly what he needed, and felt the weight of the past 4 years settle into perspective. Jennifer and Sophie weren't forgotten. Their absence still ached on hard days, still shaped who Lucas was becoming. But alongside that grief lived joy and possibility, and a future that had seemed impossible in those darkest months after the accident. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria touched his arm. "How much changes in a year? How much changes in 4 years? Good changes or bad changes?" "Both. That's life, right? The good and bad all mixed together, and you just have to keep showing up." Lucas tugged on Michael's hand. "Dad, can we come back here next year too? For our anniversary?" "Every year, buddy. It's tradition now." They walked out into the Manhattan morning, a family of three moving through crowds that parted around them like water around stones. Behind them, Marcus started making drinks for the next wave of customers, each person carrying their own invisible stories of triumph and loss and ordinary miracles. On the subway back to their apartment, they'd eventually compromise, keeping the Brooklyn place for its familiarity and using Victoria's penthouse for when work demanded late nights. Lucas fell asleep against Victoria's shoulder. She stroked his hair absently while talking to Michael about the Rivers Initiative's expansion into other companies, about the 100 people they'd hired in the past year who'd all been rejected elsewhere for gaps and complications and lives too messy for traditional HR systems. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your card hadn't been declined that day?" Victoria's voice was thoughtful. "If we'd never met, I'd probably still be working night security. Lucas would be managing, but barely. And you'd still be alone in your tower trying to earn approval from a dead man." Michael considered. "So yeah, I wonder. And I'm grateful I'll never know." "Me too." Victoria kissed the top of Lucas's sleeping head. "Remind me to thank Richard next time I write to the prison." Michael looked at her sharply. "You're writing to Richard?" "Once a month, mostly just updates about the company, about how the Rivers Initiative is working. Sometimes about Sarah, his daughter finally answered one of his letters last month. They're talking again slowly." Victoria shrugged. "Forgiveness isn't one grand gesture. It's choosing not to carry poison every single day." Michael pulled her closer, careful not to wake Lucas. "Have I mentioned lately that you're remarkable?" "Not since this morning." "Consider yourself reminded." The subway carried them through the darkness beneath the city toward home, and whatever came next. Michael thought about the security guard he'd been 18 months ago, lonely, isolated, convinced his life had peaked and crashed at 34. That man wouldn't recognize who he'd become. Wouldn't believe that happiness was possible after such devastating loss, that love could multiply instead of divide, that a declined credit card could be the beginning of everything instead of the end of anything. Lucas stirred, mumbling something about dragons in his sleep. Victoria adjusted her position so he'd be more comfortable, and Michael felt the particular warmth of being part of something larger than himself. This was family. Not the one he'd been born into or the one he'd lost, but the one he'd built from rubble and courage, and a stranger's willingness to see him as more than his worst day. The train emerged from the tunnel into Brooklyn daylight. Through the windows, the neighborhood Michael had called home for 3 years looked simultaneously familiar and transformed. Same buildings, same streets, same bodega on the corner where he'd bought Lucas's piggy bank. But now he saw it through different eyes, not as a place he'd landed in desperation, but as the foundation where he'd learned to stand again. They climbed the stairs to their apartment building, Lucas now awake and complaining about being hungry despite having hot chocolate 30 minutes ago. Victoria laughed and promised pancakes, the specific kind Lucas liked, with chocolate chips arranged in dragon shapes. Michael followed them inside, listening to his son negotiate for extra chocolate chips and his wife counter-negotiate for at least some fruit on the side, and felt something he'd forgotten was possible. Peace, not the absence of pain. Lucas still had nightmares. Sometimes Michael still woke in the middle of the night reaching for someone who wasn't there. Victoria still struggled with the voice in her head that sounded like her father's criticism. But peace anyway, the peace of people who'd chosen to heal together instead of suffer alone. That evening, after Lucas was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Michael and Victoria returned to their fire escape. It had become their ritual, this space between earth and sky, between the day just ended and the one about to begin. Victoria leaned against him, both of them watching Brooklyn's lights compete with Manhattan's glow across the water. One more thing. Victoria pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I wanted you to see this before the announcement tomorrow. Michael unfolded it, a company memo announcing Victoria's new role as executive board chair instead of CEO. David Chen would be promoted to CEO, with Victoria remaining active in strategic decisions but stepping back from daily operations. You're serious about this? Completely. I've been CEO for 12 years. I proved what I needed to prove. Now I want to be present for the life I'm actually living instead of the empire I'm managing. Victoria looked up at him. Kim says Lucas is doing well enough that we could consider expanding the family. Not right away, but maybe in a year or two. And I can't do that while working 80-hour weeks. Michael's heart stopped and restarted. Expanding the family, you mean? I mean, Lucas has been asking if he could have a little brother or sister. And I've been thinking about what it would mean to be a mother from the beginning, to not come in after trauma, but to build something from love instead of loss. Victoria's voice was careful. But only if you want that. I know it's complicated with Jennifer's memory, with Lucas's needs, with everything. Michael pulled her closer. Jennifer and I talked about having more kids. Before the accident, she wanted 4 total. I wanted to stop at 2. We compromise on 3. He paused. She'd be happy knowing Lucas gets siblings, that our family keeps growing instead of staying frozen in grief. So that's a yes. That's a yes, eventually. When Lucas is ready, when we're ready, when the timing feels right. They sat in comfortable silence, planning a future neither had believed possible 2 years ago. Tomorrow would bring its own complications: board meetings, school pickups, therapy sessions, the endless logistics of lives intertwined. But tonight was for dreaming, for imagining the family they were becoming and the love that would carry them there. Michael thought about the $10 bill, about how the smallest gesture could redirect entire lives, about how kindness to strangers was never wasted, how vulnerability was strength, how healing happened in increments too small to see until suddenly you look back and realize you'd traveled miles. He thought about Jennifer and Sophie, about carrying them forward without letting their absence define everything, about Lucas learning that love multiplied, that new family didn't erase old, that hearts were expansive enough to hold both grief and joy simultaneously. And he thought about Victoria, complicated, brilliant, wounded Victoria, who'd spent 41 years building walls and then had the courage to dismantle them brick by brick, who'd chosen vulnerability over invincibility, connection over control, being fully human over being perfectly successful. Thank you. Michael's voice was rough with emotion, for seeing me when I was invisible, for being patient while I figured out how to trust again, for loving Lucas like he's yours. He is mine. You both are. Victoria kissed him softly. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't something you inherit. It's something you build with people who show up, and for showing up every single day even when it's hard. Below them, Brooklyn hummed with its own rhythms, car horns, and distant music, and the sound of 8 million lives being lived in 8 million different ways. Somewhere in this city, someone was grieving a loss they thought they'd never survive. Someone was taking a chance on a stranger. Someone was learning that endings and beginnings often look the same if you squinted hard enough. Michael and Victoria sat on their fire escape until the summer night grew cool, until their legs went numb and practical considerations like sleep and tomorrow's responsibilities intruded. Then they went inside to the life they'd built, messy and imperfect and more precious than either of them had words to describe. In his room, Lucas slept peacefully with Charlie the Dragon clutched against his chest and dragon books scattered across his floor. On the nightstand, a photo of Jennifer and Sophie sat beside a new one from the wedding. 4 people now, instead of the original 4. The family changed but not diminished. The love multiplied across time and loss and impossible second chances. This was what miracle looked like in ordinary light. Not grand gestures or divine intervention, but simple human courage, choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, building over destroying. $10 in a stranger's kindness multiplied by time and bravery, and the particular grace of people who kept showing up even when the world had given them every reason to hide. The city lights flickered outside like promises being kept, like futures being written, like ordinary miracles happening in coffee shops and on fire escapes and in small Brooklyn apartments where families were being forged from broken pieces. And Michael Rivers, who'd once believed his life was over at 34, fell asleep beside the woman he loved, dreaming of tomorrows he'd earned the right to imagine.